This is a production of Cornell University.
I want to show you a rare work at the crossroads of criminal justice and education. These are two key controversies in our society, and their intersection is not random. We know that people who end up caught in the criminal justice system come from neighborhoods with low-quality schools, amongst many other things. The experience of incarceration tends to make tall barriers to higher education even taller, meaning it's much less likely that someone will end up in college if they end up in prison first. Today, I direct the Cornell Prison Education Program. I have something boastful to say here about our program, but I think it's not necessary now that Don's given that lovely introduction. The work I'll share with you today is from the work I did before Cornell. My project was an attempt to do things in horticulture education that were new in prison in particular. Possibly new in education that we've known because of the oddness of the environment of prison and the constraints placed upon what are now the status quo, things we expect from a college classroom. So what's new about it is not so much the style of horticulture education that I was getting at or implementing, or how it was sort of somehow trying to do something fundamentally different from campus. What is remarkable about the work is how far I got in trying to make things the same to how horticulture could be taught at a good college campus. As I'm looking out at you, I see several folks who've participated in the Cornell Prison Education Program. Welcome. Actually, could we get a show of hands quick from who you are? So there's several people here in this section over here who've been involved in this. And so they will understand very well and some of them with no background in horticulture, the challenge of this talk, which is trying to both introduce things about prison. I presume for most folks in here, you've never been to a high security prison in America, and at the same time talk about the challenge of doing education, and within that, the field of horticulture in particular, and what we try to do to have meaningful labs and activities for students in prison. So I was trying to demonstrate that it was possible to do good education in prison in the field of horticulture, and I hope to share some of that with you today. There are going to be 3 sections to this talk. Tell me if I talk too fast. I've been told I can go rather quickly, but I've got a lot I'm trying to do as I just laid out. I'll try to introduce quickly higher education in prison itself, and I'll give you a quick 5 minutes on the Cornell Prison Education Program. Then I'll talk a little bit about the challenges facing horticulture education, and really still education in per se, but specifically horticulture. And then I'll talk about some of the things I did to respond to the challenges. So this 5-minute section is actually something I do on campus to introduce the program when we're recruiting faculty, graduate students, and undergraduates who participate in our program here. A quick introduction to why we would do college and prison, introducing the Cornell Prison Education Project itself, and then the broader context of correctional reform and what we think the outcomes are when we put post-secondary education in prisons. So the idea of education in prison is nothing new. This image on the left over here is actually 100 years old, Auburn, New York, a prison we work in today. Classroom, adults, learning, grade school level curriculum. That's the reason we call them correctional centers in American societies. There's this image of rehabilitation in prisons. The idea is that you don't just put people in a cell and abandon them for 10 years and expect something dramatically different to happen. You rehabilitate them, you offer them programs, you educate folks. Here's an image from the 70s when the Pell Grants were made available for the first time. You had financial aid in the United States. College programs entered into the prisons. And there was an era in which college programs flourished in American prisons. Speeding into the 80s and 90s, America was reeling from questions of what to do about crime. A lot of people, many of us may be too young for this, but if you can remember, the drumbeat of politics back then was, there's too much crime, this other politician hasn't been harsh enough about crime. This guy here thinks people in prison should be taking college classes. I don't think so. This person here thinks he should only get 6 months for this crime. We're going to give him 20 years. And you would see over a couple of decades this trend towards punitiveness, taking away programs from people who've been convicted of crimes. Specifically, the Crime Bill of 1994 made it illegal for people in prison to receive Pell Grants. Overnight, we end up with a lot of empty classrooms where there used to be college classes. So the question then is really, what do we want to do when there's harm in society? When someone's convicted of a crime and we send them away to a prison, what do we want to have happen with those individuals? Currently, these are the status quo here. We have a lot of exercise yards. You probably have seen these images. If you read the New York Times, there's kind of a drumbeat right now of we aren't doing a lot of productive stuff in there. We might even be making folks more dangerous. Making license plates actually happens at Auburn Prison. That's a photo from there. And this is a site that I saw actually down the hall from where my classroom was in Illinois, where a gym is turned into a bunk bed unit because of the overcrowding of prisons. Because people don't want to spend money on this, but they don't have another answer right now currently than just more and more incarceration. So you end up with that. So this is even taking away exercise. So okay, so now we've got folks that are literally just in a sort of refugee kind of situation. This is an image from a Cornell classroom happening at Auburn Prison. We've got a pair of graduate students at the front here, Aiden Lears and Dan Sinekin. The year before both of them pulled down professorships. Aiden's at SUNY Oswego and Dan out at Cornell, teaching a literature seminar. These are students many in the room will recognize from this section over here, having a conversation about literature. And then these classes count in our partnership with a community college towards an associate degree. Bob in the room here in this photo, along with Ron Sieber, as well as the president and provost of Cayuga Community College, who work with Cornell in order to make an associate's degree accessible to these 15 men who graduated on this particular day in 2012. And in the middle, we have a philanthropist, key theme of this work. Without financial aid, you basically have no tuition revenue. The folks that are in America's prisons are of the lowest economic strata. So there's really no way to fund college in prison, let alone combat the political climate that makes it so difficult to do this without someone providing private dollars, and typically not the students. Here are the 3 prisons that Cornell operates in. Auburn Correctional Facility up in Auburn, the medium security prison down here in Moravia, very similar to the one I'll be discussing today in Illinois, and a maximum security prison in Romulus called 5 Points Correctional Facility. Very quick slide about outcomes. This is an image of a couple of our former students. Sean, who I presented at a conference in Nashville with last week, is now a part-time student at Columbia. John, another one of our former students, is a carpenter in town, and here he is actually participating in building homeless shelters with an organization, I think, in Kimon County. And some of our undergraduates, as they go out into the world, many of whom get involved in the intersection between criminal justice and the other fields they've studied in, wearing green cords in the graduation ceremonies. Our undergrads wear green cords to symbolize the green prison uniforms that are students on the inside of the prison walls.
So a number of those individuals are female. Is that a prison that has a mix of both genders?
Good question, Don. There are no prisons that have a mix of both genders. So just to go back, is it there? Yeah. These are all male prisons. And so, yeah, we could talk about that one day. So a lot of questions it raises for folks.
Sounds like there might be a question from Geneva. I thought I heard.
Oh.
Can you repeat the question so Geneva can hear you better?
Yes, to Geneva. The question was, those are a lot of women coming from Cornell into a prison. Are the prisons male and female or mixed? And the answer was no. These are men's prisons. And that I can kind of guess where that conversation would go. Let's maybe hold off on that one. Willard. Okay, so actually the woman on the line here is sharing that right next to 5 Points Correctional Facility, right over here, there's a drug treatment and rehabilitation center, which actually is one of the main alternatives. I kind of count that as a non-prison in a way. It's a confinement facility, but it's intended to be a short stay and release where you're being treated for drug treatment, and it is a co-ed carceral facility. Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to zoom ahead here. So let's talk a little bit about this project ahead in Illinois and the challenges faced by a person who wants to just bring a solid horticulture education into the place, or folks who want to do something positive with their lives, have a chance to do something better. Why am I going back to the challenges after having just spoken about the denial of financial aid and so on? Because there are many other issues, both broad and specific to this presentation, which undergird the work and present tremendous conflicts. The broader problem is that we have 2.3 million people in prison, about 6.7 million people under correctional supervision, that's parole, and over 70 million people currently alive with criminal records. As we think about these, the challenges to employing and generating, gainful, positive futures for our society out of that negative resume that all those folks are carrying with them. That's what we're trying to combat. Here, as an institution of higher learning, we're in a position to offer education, right? So that's what does a university do in prison? Probably educate. But generally, the population we find in prison lacks access to good education. They haven't had a good background. They don't come from the best high schools. They aren't web designers already. They aren't coming with all the skills that a lot of our students would come from. They come from communities with inconsistent institutions, inconsistent mother tongue languages, and there's no ladder in front of them, good high school to a good 2-year college to a good 4-year college. And so that's usually the path that we try to construct on the inside. In this case, in Illinois, I was really trying to defy the odds. I might have to fly through some of this, but the main thing, and the folks who've been in prisons before, you might chime in the Q&A, to work within the system to change it is tremendously difficult. Any campus educator who doesn't know the correctional environment might be surprised to learn that generally there's no one-on-one conversations, there's no internet, there's no email, there are no office hours, there will be no phone calls or notes with your students. There's barely any library resources of an academic type. You can't just name drop in your class because your students can't go to Wikipedia and look up the name of that person that you were referencing. Common items are considered potential weapons or contraband, including scissors, large paper clips, DVDs, chewing gum, sugar packets, anything made of metal or glass, etc. You can imagine now why I'm saying the majority of what I'm trying to do is just do a normal education in prison, because what you see a lot of times when you go into prison is these kind of aberrations of reality. Why are we doing it this way? It's because these rules have made it impossible to do it in the regular way. To put it in perspective, many of the things I accomplished in the Illinois prison system thus far have been impossible for us to accomplish here in upstate New York with the Cornell prison education program. Though a lot of that derives from the fact that the program I did in Illinois, I had made the decision to try to work inside the system. I infiltrated the system as opposed to Cornell's, which is from without. So just to give you an image of this, teachers generally, I presume, and my colleagues throughout the world, don't have the experience of calling a Watchtower on a walkie-talkie to tell them that they're moving 11 inmates to a garden with shovels. I had a walkie-talkie, I had keys, and I had to secure every single tool when they weren't in use. On the other hand, I was the only person in the facility during day shift with a PhD. I attained the appellation doc, folks who knew me as the one person around who was highly educated and trying to create an intellectual culture there. And I was really trying to understand the structural challenges that were surmountable to make it possible to have a real rehabilitative educational program there. So those are the challenges facing horticulture in prison. I will do them fairly quickly. The anti-rehabilitation culture of the prison, competition from other units in the facility, and then inmate cynicism. And so if you think about it, this is really the overall anti-rehabilitation and the sort of inside of the components of the prison, and then person by person challenges. There are a lot of challenges. So after the denial of Pell Grants, and we might be feeling this week in our country in a lot of ways, a change in policy or a change in political era will come with a feeling of mandate. And so correctional staff were emboldened to feel like it was all right to oppose all forms of corrections in the 90s. Not just formally because there aren't Pell Grants, but also informally to say, Dr. Owens is here, I don't see why he has to come in here. I don't see his name on the list, I'm not going to let him in today. And just this kind of micro resistance to education barriers were set up everywhere. Oh, we lost the keys to that classroom, we're not using it today, this type of thing. And this persists to this day. There was rampant racist and sexist statements in my experience of working at this prison on a daily basis. And this is something I think even our folks that work from the program at Cornell don't hear as much. The gender binary of the systems really makes a very, very macho environment in these places. That's why Don's question is really right on. What happens when you send women in there? And it really permeated the day-to-day experience of the facility. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. So I actually kept a log of all this stuff, because this was upsetting. It was traumatizing to me. I was hearing my students described in a way I didn't like, right? And people opposing my mission. So this was my therapy. I actually would just say, today someone called one of my students a dog. Today someone called one of my students a beaner. You know, these kind of racially loaded words. And I worked with this author, James Lowen, who is at American University in DC. He's a historian. He wrote this book called Sundown Towns. He grew up in Decatur, Illinois. And so he remembers there were these towns called sundown towns. I don't know if you've heard about them. The quick thing is, towns in the early 20th century in Illinois would put signs on the border of the town. It would say, Things like whites only, within city limits, after dark. Or the more common one, and a slightly more vulgar one, if the sun goes down and your ass is brown, you better get out of town. Or a lot of times there was a dark-colored donkey, and it was just running, and that was the image. And this was a way of announcing that these towns didn't let black people live there. You could work there, but when the sun went down, you had to be out of town. Why am I bringing this up? I worked in a place where there were a lot of sundown towns in the past. Now there's prison towns. Let's look at Carterville real quick. This is from some of my research. This is actually a place where I had to go for my training. It was a sundown town in the old days. Where did black folks go if they could work in Carterville in the old days, but they couldn't actually live there? There's a little town called Culp up here. This is all documented in that book I just referenced. City council statements, real estate records, and so on. And so when I went to Carterville for my training, I just checked this out because I was curious. I'd already been working in the Department of Corrections. I was like, what's going on here? And so I went to Culp, I went to Carterville, and I went to John Logan College, which is where it's now the training center for Southern Illinois for the Department of Corrections. I don't think most people would know that John Logan, if you go back in time, was the guy, he basically made his political career on what's called the Negro Exclusion Act, in quotes. I don't like this language anymore, but his career was started in trying to exclude black folks from Illinois. It was really Illinois' move. We remember it today as the land of Lincoln. So, my colleagues in Illinois, this is what I was saying to Don beforehand. This is some of this stuff, people don't want to hear this today, but this is empirical. This actually occurred. And I want to say specifically here, I went to Culp, because I was driving from northern area here. It's not an it's not an all-black settlement, and Carterville is not an all-white settlement. Today, it really is not the sundown town system, so don't misconstrue what I'm trying to say here. We no longer live in this system. Culp is basically, we'd call it like a trailer settlement. A lot of low-income white folks there. And when I went to John Logan College, a lot of black folks were going to college there. So we're really not in that system anymore, but that was a legacy. Where are we at today? This is the 1952 map of where the sundown towns were in southern Illinois. And so cities that are denoted by all caps and bold were the known sundown towns of this region. And you see I've got Carterville on the red block there. That's the prison I was working in. And it extends up to northern Illinois. A lot of people know about Cicero and certain cities that were famous for this up north. Today, this is where we have prisons and jails in southern Illinois. And so these are basically prison towns, jail towns. And so, we could say to ourselves, well, maybe we just completely got rid of racism in the 60s. It all went away. There's nothing correlating between these two whatsoever. There just happens to be a comparable number, about 52 sundown towns and about 46 jail towns. This is the thing that really drives the field in a lot of ways. This is a chart, and this will be hopefully out in an article next year in American Studies, of the incarceration rate in the state of Illinois. And so you can see, if we go back to 52, we've got around 8,000 people in jails and prisons in Illinois, and and these pie charts down here carry along. They don't always report demographic data for various reasons in the correction system, but about 60% white back then, and about less than a quarter in 1999, the last time I had data. And so this is basically up to the time of the work I was doing. And the other thing I want to point out here is the dashed line is just counting facilities according to this enumeration here. So the best time, in a certain sense, to be in prison in Illinois would have been here, because the number was the lowest, about 6,000 people in jail, and you had 11 facilities. That means people had the most space, the highest inmate to staff ratio if they were involved in programs. And then when you see them starting to close prisons here, while the number keeps going up, we're above 50,000 right now, that's the overcrowding. Anti-rehabilitation culture of the prisons. This just made the whole project all the more loaded, because not only are you trying to say, hey, could you help this student get from the housing unit over to the classroom, this person's late or whatever, but you've got this constant drumbeat of these folks are really not worthy of things. Not always in explicit racial terms, but a lot of times in terms of just because they're considered criminals or inmates, they just don't deserve an education. That's just the mood of the place. All right. Competition from other prison functions. So here's how the prison works. This is the actual prison. It's a Google map. The orange house units, X-houses as we call them, had 400 people each in them. Oh, one's missing a wing. It's a solitary confinement unit over there. Was cut off that. There's a school and gym. That's where my classroom was. Perimeter fence keeps everyone in. And then this extra fence there blocks off the exercise yard. And in the purple room there, you have some folks making cardboard boxes and prison uniforms. Every prison usually has some industry where they try to produce something. About 20 inmates had access to that, out of about 1,600 inmates at this facility. Okay, but so here's the thing. The prison administration and security personnel in general preferred to limit inmate movement altogether, unless it was completely necessary. So just to get a student from the school building to the garden, which we'll talk about in a second, was a tremendous act of asking for permission. And this is how they like it. So here's an ex-house in Illinois. The grass has been pretty poorly treated. No one's moving, there's no trees, there's no people. This is just a completely controlled environment. You can see if people didn't want to send folks out to the exercise yard, you could just say exercise in here today. So when I was in this area, I had 2 watchtowers on either side of the garden. And so there was always this kind of constant surveillance of things. And you can imagine then, if you've got a party that's in the watchtower that's kind of looking to stop education, they basically had a kind of constant micromanagerial kind of thing they were doing of saying, I think I saw someone do something wrong there. So they can get on a loudspeaker from a watchtower and say, inmate so-and-so, come over here, or you need to go back to the classroom or whatever. So these were the resistances. Zooming in a little bit more, you can see here's the school, so I'd have to walk out here to do this. And you can see there's a greenhouse. So this is actually, the main thing here is this should be an environment of a huge opportunity. That's a 0.91 acre garden space that's been pre-established at the prison and a greenhouse. Here's the thing, there was this grounds crew at the prison, which, yeah, I'm going to break the seal and say the prison was corrupt and stool pigeons got to be in the grounds crew. And so the grounds crew got the greenhouse and the garden before I established this sort of funding apparatus by which we could have a horticulture program. And I had to work really hard politically to get access to this greenhouse for my students, and I could not get access to the greenhouse. So that was the place that basically a collection of 10 inmates on this grounds crew, which would do lawn mowing, including lawn mowing outside of the fence, driving tractors around, raking leaves to the extent there were trees, getting ice off the sidewalks. They could hang out in a greenhouse in the cold winter when all the housing units were fairly cold. And most people didn't have any space because they were stuck in a small cell. They could be in a greenhouse growing poinsettias for the administrator's office. And so they never in the 2.5 years I was in this program let our program use the greenhouse. This is really problematic. This is actually the only photo I have of myself in the classroom. And so this is actually the classroom in the school building. You can see these tall sort of warehouse-like walls, no windows. That's me. I'm in a green hoodie here. I had no idea a camera person was coming. You can see some of the students here. You can also see there's some folks on computers back there. And yeah, so imagine after the first frost, when the garden's effectively not useful any longer in terms of doing new projects, waterlogged, et cetera, that the grounds crew control of the greenhouse is particularly frustrating. And we'll talk more about that. So the inmate cynicism about vocational education. So finally, then you have this question of how do you find good students in here? I'll try to do this quick. This is actually the only thing that the state of Illinois does in terms of post-secondary education opportunities when universities and colleges don't have proactive campaigns like Cornell's and the University of Illinois program. That's where I came from. So here's Danville. It's got 3 types of courses that are offered. Automotive technology, horticulture, and career technology. What are those 3 things? The automotive, what is it called? Automotive tech. That was doing custom paint jobs on correctional officers' cars and trucks for free, or for the cost of the paint. Souping up their engines. I remember people detailing carburetors and putting like insignias and American flags on the different parts of the cars and stuff. And that was that. And then Career Tech was a 6-week class in which you learned how to turn on a computer and use Microsoft Word. So that's the status quo into which what you're about to see me trying to do comes in. A brief comment on jobs. Everyone always wants to ask about jobs. Now, you could do a whole presentation on this. This is just one paper of chart from the 2012 study, comparable time in Indiana, right next door to where we were at, in terms of what kind of job outcomes in a group of 5,000 or more folks had over a 5-year sequence. And these red block boxes are just trying to show any overlap with, in the way this paper defined it, the categories of post-secondary education that are offered in the prison. It doesn't even get into what are, so just to put a asterisk, academic programs have a much wider range of outcomes. I was just talking with Tom here about one of our folks that was in our program, the one at Columbia, is now an Uber driver. Another who's now at Lehman College is a registered nurse. Another who's going to that school of business in Baruch College is a paralegal. John's a carpenter, so a carpentry. So there's some overlap, but that's the whole point of having a liberal arts education, is we think that liberal arts education will lead you to a proper consideration of having examined life. Finally, good time is a 100-year-old concept that, I'm going really fast, that's what I said I wouldn't do. Check it out, there's an old idea in prison, which is you got a bunch of people, they're in prison, they did something bad, they're gonna get released one day, a lot of them are gonna come back to prison for doing another bad thing. What if you could take some of them, figure out some activity to give them that would guarantee that when they go out, they're productive and they become taxpayers and they don't come back? That'd be really valuable to the state, right? So you could take that activity and actually credit them and give them time off their sentence. You could incentivize them to become these good people. So that's called good time. So 100 years on, that has become the most piñataed concept. It is so bureaucratized and barrier-ridden that it's almost impossible to implement this in a good way. If nothing else, I'm highlighting here that the very definition of it in Illinois said that people who had violent offenses, sex offenses, or anything involving a weapon. So even if I go into a store and no one gets hurt, but I said I have a knife on me, you're never getting good time. Crazy review. I won't even explain this to you, but basically the time it takes to get a few months off your sentence, it starts all the way in the courthouse before you're in prison and extends all the way to the day of your release. And there's 6 different layers of review. You basically would spend more time getting the good time than getting off of your sentence by now. Here are the actual people that got good time from my program. I had about 120 people over those 2 years take classes with me. 14 students were eligible at all. Everyone who's eligible tries to do it. And they fill out contracts. Typically, I would get about 3 out of if they were to take all my courses. So days are credited towards release from prison, and then the rule in Illinois is you get half of that number of days off of your sentence. So you can actually calculate out the number of days, or in this case I did it by years, of sentence reduction that my course generated, multiply that by the cost per person in prison, and then there's a cost savings to the state of about $35,000. I just want to point this out. These ones with parentheses, these are folks that didn't get the credit in the end. Their contract was voided because, again, they did, inmate was out of place, got written up, throw out their good time, or whatever. Had a pen that was unauthorized, throw out their good time. So there would have been actually much more, but ineligibility and that kind of constant rule micromanagement interfered with this. Finally, this was the real point. People then become hugely cynical about this. So some of these were some of my worst students. Because these are the folks that were basically like, okay, I'm stuck at Danville. I've got another 3 years in prison. What do we got here? Automotive tech? I don't want to go detail some officer's car. Career tech? Well, that's only 6 weeks, so I'm only going to just turn on a computer and get out of there. The only thing you can get out of that is a couple weeks off your sentence anyway. There's this Doc Scott guy, and he's like making everyone go out to a garden. Okay, I'll try that. And they would be the students that would be there saying, if I get out of my chair, will I lose good time? If I get a C minus, can I still have good time? If I don't come to class tomorrow because I feel sick, am I going to get good time? Will you credit the day for good time if I leave early today because I have a virus? And so that was just a constant conversation. And so this actually is just another barrier. So it's just an example of on the individual level barrier to this stuff. Okay, this is what we wanted to hear. Responses to the challenges. I need to underscore how rare and unheard of this work is. You will hear me now reference a garden with hundreds of species of plants, a library with thousands of titles on its shelf, computers in the classroom, students participating in the construction of meaningful projects aimed at helping their fellow men. This is really against the odds and the infighting environment of prison and against considerable resistance. I've of course said this now a million times, so I'll spare you. Here are the 3 parts of this, or 2 parts of this section. It's going to be quick so we can have some Q&A. This is fundamentally, everything this education work is about is trying to respond to this contentious environment. And really, hopefully, particularly this week, creating an environment where people can really have a discussion with each other and try to understand each other and try to move forward into a fruitful future together. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the specific things that I did. This is a classroom I taught of guys in 2013 for the University of Illinois in my other hat, which is an educational researcher. And I just want to point out, look at the mood in this room. So it's an all-male facility, right? These guys are not in a mode of being dangerous, psychopathically, any little micro thing they do is going to be a trouble. This is a community that formed around our program. You can see part of the library here. There's a library that's spread over 3 rooms the way that we did it. We get to sit at seminar tables. We're reading research articles. And I know all these people. This is the main difference between folks that do this work firsthand, like some of the folks here in the room, and folks that talk about this and write about it but have never visited. I know that Johnny Page is in Governor State University today. Michael Braun, guy from New Jersey, like me, happen to know him, is about to publish an article in Harvard Educational Review. Came out of some of this educational work we did there. The prison's trying to block him from publishing it. It's on the really dangerous topic of how education for prisoners could enhance democracy by having people have informed voices. So Harvard likes it, administration, not so much. This guy is a person who's now a teacher in a Catholic school in Morelia in Mexico. He was deported, even though he was brought to the US when he was 1 year old, sentenced without evidence at the age of 15. He did 15 years in the prison. He was my age and is now living in Mexico where he'd never lived before. And he's a Catholic school teacher. And his wife is a friend of mine. She's works in the college there. So these are all people with names to me. They're all people that are actually doing things that are good. And that's the thing to remember through all this. Let's get into what I was doing here. This is actually, I didn't know they were going to take this photo either. It was the day of my job interview where they said, look, we tilled up the land for you. Check this out. And I talked to a bunch of people who know nothing about horticulture who hired me to do this, all right? And I provided the funding for myself. So, you know, back to the fundamental challenge of having no tuition money. Now we're looking at a USGS soil survey for the site. Here's where the garden would be. The interesting thing here is that you folks should be familiar with this. So you're looking at a Caitlin series. The Midwest soils are typically mollisols and alpha soils. The garden was in a particularly boggy area. So this is one of the things that made this land not too valuable to the Mennonites who sold it to the state in the early 80s and made it into a prison. So it turns out the garden is right in the spot that made the site completely invaluable as a place to do agriculture. It's surrounded by corn and soybean fields. Oh, and also just to note, here's the Indiana border. So I was comparing to Indiana, where you basically, if you're in a cell on that side of the building, you're looking at Indiana. All right, let's get in here. So we made maps of this stuff. This is by itself a huge feat. Imagine an environment in which a string that's this long is considered contraband because you could put it around someone's neck. It's never happened in this prison, but that's the type of thing they say in the kind of constant looking for criminality mindset that runs the place. So let alone a tape measure, which is metal, which is even worse. So we actually had to manufacture the tools to do this. And I would then supplement what we were doing with satellite photos, as you can see, to try to produce sufficient drawings to show what we were trying to do. The red lines in this case are digging little channels to drain the thing. So they wouldn't allow us to install culverts because you couldn't hide weapons in culverts. So we had to do this type of thing. You can see I'm just trying to get the water to go in one direction away from here. And right away, tremendous food waste going on in prison. So the goal in Illinois is to feed people on $1 per day or less. The result is very low quality food, and the result is inmates going to the cafeteria, getting their food presented to them, eating the cookie, and the rest gets tossed. So we very quickly got into this composting work. An image of what we were trying to do the first year, of course these are final crown size. We didn't get any access to bring in full-size trees. So we bought bare root seedling trees and grafted trees in order to start implementing this. It's just an image of what it looks like the first year. Shouldn't be much information here, but you can see the stakes are where we're putting the trees and mulching it with grass clippings and leaves and fresh compost we'd made. Here's where we got by May. So you can see then a lot of this is food. So for another day, the whole thing of bringing nutritious food into a place with the cafeteria dynamics like I described is going to have its own excitations and conflicts laden into it. And we start getting into this drought period. This is actually kind of devastating. So there was a drought right around a lockdown, so we couldn't go out there and water plants. They wouldn't let inmate movement, back to that. And so this is where you start getting triangulated by all these constraints. It must have rained one day and someone took a photo. It's the only photo I have looking that way that ever was taken. So this is that building where they make cardboard boxes, the greenhouse here. And you can see we're starting to put compost piles out here. And when the lockdown continued at that year and the drought continued, you can see the yellow beds represent beds that basically tanked when it got too dry. The irony of our waterlogged soil having been drained properly. We had to find some other activity. And so I worked with the construction class when they wouldn't let our students move to actually produce proper compost bins. And we get a sort of rebounding of the garden when they let us back out there in September, and then it's a frost. So again, now you got to imagine, I've got a good 6 months or more. It's USDA Zone 5, so probably 7 months. In which it's not reasonable to think that you're going to have much productivity if you plant plants. So what do? we started dividing up the garden beds and offering the men opportunities to kind of compete with each other to do better designs for the different sections of the garden. We had competitions for the spaces that were common. Weird things like this showed up on the computer. This was made with MS Paint, I think, and cut and paste. I actually don't know how Mr. Stilson did this. This won the competition, not because it's reasonable, because this looks like water to me. And I don't know what that would do for the flowering crab apple or whatever that is. I'm not even sure what species he thought we were going to plant here, and this is pretty two-dimensional. But the idea was we want a picnic table, a table, and to try putting some elevation to one of the trees, so that because people like sitting on these little stoops, and that then made it into the design, right? So we actually started kind of doing this type of thing. We ended up with river birch as the species we were trying for there, and you can kind of see as we're going along here that a lot was developing in 2013. I should say, for another day, there was a whole project of Illinois exporting me across the state to implement our composting system. I'm not even going to tell you about that, but the composting thing was huge because of the tens of thousands of dollars of waste expenses that the facility incurred, and this being a way to process things back into the site. We started using the construction classroom, which was abandoned, to produce cement pavers by hand and to teach the dynamics of construction and Portland cement and aggregate and all that stuff and get these things out here so you could walk through the prairie. You can see this was supposed to be getting designed as a Japanese garden. We had a lot of ideas, and Cornell University offered me a job, so that's where we stopped. But I want to say I needed to get out of there. Just you've heard me. I'm giving you actually a fairly sanitized version of this. This was grading psychological work for me. I was working every weekend. I was constantly bringing in books, PDFs, trying to get clearance through a bunch of people that didn't want me to do this. So I don't recommend anyone do this. I mean, I was doing the Superman thing, the sort of martyred teacher trying to make it possible to do this thing in the impossible environment. And when I left, a lot of my students had also done this educational academic work with me, and they said, "What are you going to say when you leave here?" I said, "I'm going to say this was my time in the trenches. I tried to get into the system and make it change, and we're still hated here. There's still a bunch of messes with what this is. There's lockdowns, and for nothing. Here's a satellite image. They mowed it after I left, I'm told. So this is supposedly September of 2013. You can still see some shadows, which suggests that maybe some shrubs there have survived. But you can see the paver stones. You can see the Curly River. And I could say a few things about the other stuff we did, and then you can ask me more about this. So other responses to some of these challenges I've laid out to you. There's this greenhouse simulation type of thing I did with grow lights. We tried to make labs work, very challenging. Design competitions, practice exams, and student-produced field guides. You've maybe seen one of these things. I generally don't love these things. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to do it without the lights, but if you've got nothing but vertical space, this is how you do it. And this is in an all-cement room, and I got 2 of these things on that state budget based on the fact that I used the logic of good time. I got the state to give me an appropriation to buy 2 of these things and give everyone 2 trays of plants they could mess around with in the winter. And I would engage the students in the real study of biodiversity. So we had a student from Cameroon. We studied the flora and fauna of Cameroon. We started growing baobab trees from seed in these trays, and declared that there would be a baobab bonsai garden. Anyway, we also got, I should say, cold frames. That was another thing. So we put cold frames there, and also in other places in the garden that we would walk by as a way to try to get movement and try to get, to really normalize it at the facility. I don't know why I'm showing this one. Oh, I'm showing this one because you see these things on people's desks. So you're not allowed to have glass, but there were peanut butter jars that people would buy in the commissary, and the guys would scrub them clean, and not really allowed, but somehow they ended up in the classroom. And what I'm doing there is, people should be familiar with this, the soil shake test. It's an old trick to introduce people to soil particle size. You shake up a sample in some water, and it sediments out, and you can use the soil triangle and give some approximation of what type of soil you've got. So this is the type of thing I would have to do, is like figure out what could happen through this and what could happen through that. I'm just giving examples from the soil class because that's happened to be one that I had at hand. We actually did soil pits, dug them, and checked out shovels and checked out the different stratification of soil layers. I would take PEDs of the soil home, photograph it because there's no cell phones in prison, there's no cameras available. Take it home, photograph it, and add it into the worksheet so people could see what we're getting at. And so all these other things, you might be surprised to hear you can't have a piece of string, you can't have a piece of metal. But imagine what it looks like to get a bunch of inmates to dig a 60-inch soil pit right next to the fence of a prison inside of 2 watchtowers with a hose sitting around that you could throw over the fence. I mean, This you get an image of kind of my world. I was trying to explain that to a bunch of correctional officers. Folks that were using the Excel thing started to offer to make crossword puzzles every week. Again, we're in soil here, but this would be an entire week production. They'd trade it off and do a kind of blind review of each other, like, okay, we got this thing, and it was actually widgetized within the Excel thing so that when you type in wrong letters, it would give you the sense that you got them wrong, and there's some kind of winning of the whole thing. Field guides, this was another thing that, again, keeping the students occupied in thoughtful activity all day. We allowed the students to produce this field guide thing in PowerPoint. I'm getting towards the end, I know we're getting late. There's one birch tree in the entire place. I bring in images that would show what was actually there. This was a section header, so this is no frills PowerPoint field guide. But this is a plant you saw all the time. People are always kind of amazed. We haven't even touched on the fact that most of these guys are coming from urban areas where there's not a lot of plants. And I would say the name of the plants on the sidewalk, and it was always like, Doc knows like way too many plants. And so this was a way to kind of say, bring in a picture of that, give us the name, we're going to compete with you, Rob, and we're going to know these plants too. So in the weed section, you'd see purslane, and people particularly loved it that this was like semi-edible plant or whatever. But it's also ubiquitous in Chicago. The animal one is actually really interesting because a lot of this animal diversity only showed up because of the plant diversity that we had with the perennials and the drainage regime and doing different things to make habitat, not intentionally for the animals, but as a side effect. So this is just a short list from an early version of this. This is an animal that is ubiquitous in Chicago, and so people don't even know. It's also in the prison. Yeah, you can hear it. So this was, even to have this in a prison environment where you could hear and look at and learn the name of and the habitat of animals that you're seeing in great flocks. I mean, I'm talking about, you got dumpsters of wasted soy food for inmates covered with crows every morning, and people don't know if it's a crow or a grackle or a starling or whatever. This was a real moment. This was probably the most interesting moment of the year. When we had that drainage change and we got that lake going, crawfish returned to the garden, probably from hundreds of years ago, right? Somehow they were hanging out in the drainage ditches, I suppose, around the prison. And someone was digging in the garden. You hear this holler go up, there's a lobster in my garden bed. And of course the Watchtowers are like, everyone hold still, and we're like, what's going on? Obviously this was a way to sort of codify and make it into a learning moment when these things would come around. Finding these things in your garden bed, is that a good thing? Do I want this bug in here? Is this a bad thing? What are worm castings? They're all over my garden bed. We put a lot of compost in there. And this is the final thing I'm going to say about this, and then I'll just do a wrapping statement. We basically had, you can't see the cursor here, but we made this is a hypertext. So, again, absence of computer literacy. A real liberal education, you don't need to just give a career tech class. You can teach writing, you can teach genetics, and through that, introduce to people to reading PDFs. Could be email, other things. In this case, hypertext. So you could click on the word crawfish and you'll go to it. You could click on the word earthworm and it'll go to that slide. So, so folks were actually getting a very elementary introduction to how the internet works. If you've been in prison since the 90s, you have never lived in a society that has cell phones. Just think about that for a second. How do you get a housing today? Computer. How do you get a job? Computer. Just imagine what folks are facing when they come out of this environment. Closing comment. These were attempts to bring horticulture education into prison. As I said at the beginning, the point here was not that I was trying to develop a special prison education that is totally different, but rather an education that would be, to the greatest extent possible, the same as a good horticulture education would be at a decent quality college campus. I really only know of one other program that got as far as the Danville project in terms of including a pedagogy of sustainability. It's called the Sustainable Prisons Program. I got to visit it when I was at Evergreen State College in Washington. But none of the other projects I've seen have been as hands-on in the practice of food production while simultaneously introducing an academic body of scholarly research and building ladders of opportunity that lead up to a university education and so on. The limits to what was possible here were largely the consequences of my decision to work inside the prison, and for various reasons, while there are different limits, I'm inclined to say the better point of leverage is to work from without the prison system. I really do think that is the proper place for universities to work. And that's where we find the work of the Cornell Prison Education Program. And that's it. I thank you for your time. I welcome your questions, and you're welcome to contact me.
For
For those of us that may be unfamiliar, can you briefly describe how the university without, as you described it, what does that look like? How is that different than this one?
Well, the main thing is, frankly, the psychological turmoil is much lower for someone that at least can come back to campus at all times and can have a community. I mean, really that's what the Cornell Prison Education Program has provided, is a sense that we're not the prison. There's a reason we're not. Fundamentally, we're trying to create a culture of learning, provide opportunities to people who are willing to work, who apply to our schools, to gain a positive credential that will be with them for the rest of their life. Prisons are about, these people have been caught doing something wrong. We're going to detain them and constrain what opportunities they have and give them a permanently negative record for the rest of their life. So we have to be different from that. We can't, it's kind of a dialectic. We can try to have a spot where there's a collaboration, but working there, I felt myself becoming it. I kind of really don't know how else to put this. And that's what happened to those other teachers that I've described. I haven't even talked about the GED teachers. I mean, you've got classrooms that have been turned into a piece of the prison corruption. It's because of the bad power dynamics. And I don't want to run a program like that, and I don't think that's the place that universities will ultimately find themselves best positioned to do real research on what else could be done. And it's just like, they fundamentally sign you off if you're never going to be able to publish any of this, you're never going to be able to talk about any of this when you get there. And I mentioned to Don when I started, this is one of the reasons they really put the fright into you of police power. And so, yeah, I was very hesitant and skittish to say anything. The repercussions would have gone to my students, who I want to see turning into those good guys and stuff. Other question? Yeah.
So in Cornell Garden-Based Learning, we work with folks statewide in a number of settings, and we have for many years. And our guidance to folks whenever we begin working with them is to start small, to do a really stellar job with something really small, working with everybody across all the layers of administration, and to do a beautiful job, you can always grow. And you know, just watching this, I'm both like, wow, and tired out from the presentation. So if you were to do it again, and looking back on what, I mean, you called yourself, you know, the Superman approach. What would you do initially and do just an absolutely stellar, thorough, thoughtful, amazing job, knowing, you know, all the rest can follow if you have a successful experience? How would you begin again?
And can you briefly repeat the question?
Sorry, Janine. Yes, so this question is, given how extensive and Superman-like that I was attempting to be here and that I burned out and ultimately left, sorry, because I was looking for another job to get out of this, what would you say to someone else who's coming into this? What would you do differently? And would it be worth it to consider a small, good success instead of a big burnout? Yeah, I think that you've really got some insights there. And candidly, I was really trying to provoke the edge between the very tight environment and, you know, the liberal education I'm interested in seeing being a contributor to criminal justice reform. A few things. I would refuse to take this job if they didn't give a winter break, a spring break, a summer break, and some off time for the students, particularly in the winter. I'd be fine to be that intensive for 9 months and have it be a 9-month appointment. They required it to be 12 months. I mean, I worked the day and after, before and after Thanksgiving. I worked December 24th, January 31st, and these guys are abandoned by just about everything else. So a lot of us here know this, who are from the prison program. When you leave those students in the prison, it can be emotionally hard to do this. And so it became a way that I dealt with it was to just dive in. The better thing would have been to say, let's have a period of rest, give folks a book and let them get a rest so the teacher can preserve himself. I would also start off with a curriculum. I basically developed this curriculum. We all know how much it is just to develop the syllabus. I basically developed 9 courses over those first 6 months that I then got to repeat twice. The teaching load was absolutely unsustainable. And community colleges are often guilty of this. It has a lot to do with their budget situation. But I handed this off to another person who took this on, and I gave every single PowerPoint presentation. I had actually gotten to the point where I'd set up a situation like this so you could do overhead projections. The library was intact, the cold frames were there, locks and secured in the tool room, the grow lights, the tools, 2 inmates that were assigned to be assistants to the program, and that person burned out after 2 years. So, but at least if I had started there, I think it would have been interesting to see if I'd made it 5 years doing this instead of 2. And we have, even in Cornell's program, there's a kind of dynamic here, which is there's a lot of time a founding group that really extends them so far, but then is also very exposed because the facilities and the correctional folks see those individuals as having pushed it too far. And so you'll see the initial group kind of pull back a little bit and another group kind of make something sustainable. This program still exists. I don't know the current teacher, so it was hard, but I know they've got those computers there and they've got these, or some version of what we started in those 2 years there. Other question?
Thank you for doing this. This is really, I'm really moved by your work there, but I'm wondering if you have any hope for shows like Orange is the New Black. Do you think that could kind of galvanize people towards prison reform efforts just by bringing it more to the mainstream media and letting people see the microaggressions and things that you're talking about?
That's actually a very good question. You know, I think that the media has played a big role in the past years of nuancing the portrayal of carceral spaces, and that'd be an example of it. There's pluses and minuses to that show. When you're really in these places, and a lot of people think the one prison they've seen is representative of the whole system, and so any writer or any person like me can fall into that fallacy. But I think that there's a lot there in just, because I know, I haven't seen the series in full, but I know there's a habit of going back and showing where these stories started. And you heard almost everyone that I've got a story about, it's like starting at the age of 12, or starting at the age of 15, when the first incarceration occurs. And so it's hard for us to blame our own 12 and 15-year-olds for everything they do, because they're obviously making bad choices. And so similarly there, I think some of that work is actually really good in building some semblance of empathy between groups that probably don't meet each other. Even better, I think, is programs like Cornell's program, which this semester is sending over 100 people into 3 correctional facilities to actually do that, to actually know these folks, to actually know what's going on when math phobia kicks in, and you realize, I'm actually good at college, and I just have a real psychological barrier around algebra. And I can't get a college degree unless I get past this, but here's some folks from Cornell, a totally different community than me, totally different level of access to resources, coming in anyway and saying, we're going to send you a tutorial, we're going to bring in undergraduates that can help you with this, we're going to let you do it a second time, or do it as pass-fail first, and making it possible, and giving folks the chance to decide whether they want to do it or not, and really, you learn the personality and the life stories of folks through all this. So we're not there as personal counselors, but I do think that that actually, there's a movement for college and prison. I mean, that's the reason the White House was interested in this work. Going back to the White House this Wednesday with one of our former students to talk with the Secretary of Education about the future of this work. And it's because we need to bring people together. And I think that shows can try to do that, but there's also, sometimes they laugh at that show. I mean, sorry, sometimes I can't tell why people are laughing at it, right? Yeah. Is it because that character is tragically sad and this is a quirky way of presenting it, or are we laughing at them because they're being humiliated and we kind of enjoy seeing people in an impossible situation doing all kinds of contortions to survive what prison throws at them.
I think we're out of time, but I want to thank Ron for a fascinating presentation. Thank you so much.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.